My beloved child. Stay with these words for a little while, because the story I am about to place before your heart does not begin with a grand sign, a dramatic reunion, or a promise that everything will suddenly become easy. It begins in a quiet room. A room where a clock seemed louder than usual. A room where the afternoon light had begun fading through half-closed blinds. A room where someone who had spent much of their life avoiding difficult feelings was suddenly sitting beside a woman who no longer had time for avoidance. And in that room, your name was spoken. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Almost as a whisper. But what she said about you unsettled something inside the person you have carried in your heart, because she touched a truth they had been trying not to face. My beloved child, you have wondered more than once whether the silence meant you were forgotten. You have wondered whether distance erased everything. Whether what you felt was somehow deeper on your side than it ever was on theirs. There were nights when you replayed conversations you wished you could stop remembering. There were mornings when you told yourself you were done asking questions that had no answers. And slowly, painfully, you began learning something important. Your life could not remain suspended around another person's uncertainty. That lesson mattered. Because while you were learning how to stand again, something was changing in them too. Not all at once. Not through some magical instant of revelation. It happened in fragments. A memory here. A regret there. A song that caught them off guard. A familiar street. A phrase someone used that sounded strangely like something you used to say. A quiet evening when they opened your old conversation, stared at the screen longer than they wanted to admit, and then closed it without writing anything. They were trying to move forward. At least, that was the story they told themselves. But before I tell you what happened in that quiet room, you need to understand why the woman's words reached them so deeply. She knew them well. Not perfectly, because no human being knows another completely, but well enough to recognize the way they protected themselves. She had watched them laugh when they were uncomfortable. Change the subject when something became too personal. Pretend not to care when caring frightened them. She understood that some people do not run because they feel nothing. Sometimes they run because feeling something gives another person the power to disappoint them. That does not excuse the hurt they cause. It does not turn silence into devotion. It does not mean every person who disappears secretly loves the one they left behind. But in this particular heart, fear had been wearing the clothing of indifference for a long time. And she had noticed. The woman had been ill for months. By the time your soulmate came to see her that final afternoon, the room already carried the stillness that comes when everyone understands what no one wants to say aloud. There was a glass of water near the bed. A folded blanket. A small lamp glowing in the corner. Family photographs on a dresser. Nothing theatrical. Nothing extraordinary. Just life reaching one of its most honest moments. Your soulmate sat beside her, unsure what to say. For once, there was no clever response available. No distraction. No phone conversation to escape into. No later. That word had lost its power in that room. Later. People build entire lives around it. I'll call later. I'll apologize later. I'll tell them how I feel later. I'll fix it when things calm down. I'll become honest when I am less afraid. But the woman beside them was proof that later is not a promise. For several minutes, they simply talked about ordinary things. A family memory. A meal she used to cook. A neighbor she always complained about but secretly liked. They even laughed once. A small laugh. Then she became quiet. Her eyes settled on your soulmate's face. And she asked a question. Are you still pretending you don't miss them? The room changed. Your soulmate looked away. They knew exactly who she meant. No name was necessary. They tried to smile. Tried to dismiss it. You should rest. But she did not let them escape so easily. She had no reason left to participate in anyone's emotional performance. Her breathing was shallow, but her mind was clear. She looked at them and said, "You always do that." Do what? Hide inside another sentence. Those words stayed suspended between them. Your soulmate's eyes dropped toward their hands. The woman waited. And finally, after a silence that felt much longer than it was, they admitted something they had almost never allowed themselves to say. I don't know what I would even say to them now. There it was. Not a confession of eternal destiny. Not a promise. Just the first honest sentence. And sometimes honesty begins with admitting that we no longer know how to repair what fear helped us break. The woman watched them carefully. Do you still care? Your soulmate swallowed. Then nodded. Barely. She asked, does that person know? No answer. And she understood. This is where you must listen with wisdom, my beloved child, because hidden affection can sound beautiful in a story, but in real life, love cannot survive forever as a secret someone refuses to carry responsibly. You have already experienced what silence can do. It makes you investigate yourself. You start wondering whether you were too much, too emotional, too available, too distant, too hopeful. You reread your own kindness as though kindness were evidence against you. You examine every conversation trying to identify the exact moment you became difficult to love. But another person's inability to communicate is not a measurement of your worth. The dying woman understood this too. She told them quietly, missing someone is easy. Loving them well is harder. Your soulmate looked up. That sentence cut deeper than they expected. Because they had missed you. They had thought about you more often than they admitted. But had they loved you well? That question was different. They remembered the times you tried to talk and they became distant. The moment you asked what was wrong and they said, nothing, even though everything inside them was tangled. The time you gave them space because they asked for it, only to have them quietly resent the distance they themselves had created. They remembered your patience. And then they remembered the limit of your patience. There had been a change in you near the end. You stopped chasing explanations. Stop trying to turn mixed signals into clear answers. Stop trying to rescue conversations they refuse to enter honestly. At the time, your soulmate interpreted that change as proof you no longer cared. But the woman beside them saw it differently. She said, maybe they got tired of carrying both sides. Your soulmate went completely still. Because that was the truth they had been avoiding. You did not necessarily walk away because you felt nothing. You may have stepped back because caring without clarity was exhausting you. There is a difference. And suddenly, memories began returning with sharper meaning. An ordinary night when you had asked, can you just tell me what you need from me? They had answered, I don't know. A morning when you sent a simple message and waited hours for a reply because they were deliberately trying not to appear too invested. A conversation when you tried to explain what hurt, and instead of listening, they became defensive. A moment when you looked at them with an expression they now understand was disappointment mixed with love. They had remembered these scenes before. But not like this. Before, they remembered what you said. Now they were remembering what they did. That is the difference between nostalgia and accountability. Nostalgia asks, why can't things feel the way they used to? Accountability asks, what did my choices contribute to what happened? The woman reached for their hand. Her voice had become weaker. Did they make you feel safe? Your soulmate nodded again. This time more quickly. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Did you make them feel safe? They could not answer. Not because the answer was completely no. There had been beautiful moments. Moments of tenderness. Times you laughed together so easily the rest of the world seemed far away. Times they remembered a tiny detail you thought they had forgotten. Times their presence calmed you. Times you could sit in silence without discomfort. There had been something real. But real does not always mean healthy. Real does not always mean ready. And deep feelings do not erase careless behavior. The woman knew that. She was not trying to convince your soulmate that you were destined to reunite. She was asking something far more important. Were they capable of becoming honest enough to deserve another conversation with you? Outside the room, someone walked slowly down the hallway. A cart rolled past. The clock continued. Your soulmate looked toward the window, and for reasons they could not explain, they suddenly remembered an evening with you. Nothing dramatic had happened that night. You had both been tired. Maybe you were sitting in a car. Maybe at a kitchen table. Maybe somewhere quiet after a long day. You had said something simple. I don't need perfect. I just need real. At the time, your soulmate almost brushed past it. Now those words returned with weight. Real. That was what they had been afraid of. Real required being seen. Real required admitting need. Real required allowing someone to matter enough that losing them would hurt. So they chose control instead. Control felt safer. Until they discovered control could become another kind of loss. The woman squeezed their fingers gently. Then she whispered, "Don't go back just because you're lonely." Your soulmate looked at her. She continued. "And don't stay away just because you're scared." That contradiction followed them for days. Do not return from loneliness. Do not remain absent from fear. Two very different warnings. Because missing you was not enough. If they were going to reach out, it could not be because an emotional night made them nostalgic. It could not be because they wanted reassurance that you still cared. It could not be because they were afraid someone else might value you properly. It could not be because death had briefly reminded them that life is short. If they came toward you again, it needed to be with truth. That final visit did not magically turn them into a different person. Real change rarely happens that cleanly. The next morning, fear returned. So did the old habits. They picked up their phone. Opened your chat. Typed, "Can we talk?" Deleted it. Typed, "I've been thinking about you." Deleted that too. Then they put the phone down. 4 hours. Later that evening, they opened a photograph. It was not necessarily a romantic photograph. That made it worse. Maybe you were laughing at something outside the frame. Maybe you looked tired. Maybe your hair was imperfect. Maybe the lighting was ordinary. But it captured something they had forgotten to appreciate when it was close to them. Ease. You looked comfortable. And they remembered feeling comfortable too. Not excited in the dramatic sense people often confuse with love. Safe. There is an intimacy in being able to be ordinary with someone. They had chased intensity after you. Interesting conversations. New attention. People who seemed easier because there was less history involved. But occasionally, while speaking with someone new, they would hear themselves compare the feeling. Not the person. The feeling. Did they feel understood? Did they feel calm? Could they admit weakness? Could they be quiet without performing? And your memory kept appearing. That realization frightened them. Because once they admitted you mattered, another question appeared. What if they had realized it too late? That became the next battle. Not whether they missed you. Whether they had the right to interrupt your peace. They wondered whether you were happier now. Whether someone else had entered your life. Whether you would see their name on your screen and feel warmth, or exhaustion. Whether the apology they had imagined giving you would sound sincere or merely convenient. They wrote versions of that apology in their mind. Some sounded beautiful. Too beautiful. And deep down, they knew beautiful words were not the same as changed behavior. So something in them began becoming more honest. They stopped asking, "How do I get them back?" They started asking, "If I ever speak to them again, can I show up differently?" That is a much more mature question. My beloved child, perhaps you have wondered, if someone truly cared, why would they wait this long? Sometimes the answer is uncomfortable. Because caring does not automatically make someone emotionally courageous. A person can care and still avoid. Care and still make selfish decisions. Care and still lack the skills required for a healthy relationship. Care and still need to grow. That does not mean you must wait. It does not mean their fear becomes your responsibility. It simply means human hearts are complicated. And wisdom refuses to romanticize what harmed you. If a person returns with only longing, be careful. If they return with only regret, listen, but remain observant. If they return with dramatic promises but no accountability, protect your peace. Healthy love does not ask you to abandon discernment. Communication matters. Honesty matters. Respect matters. Courage matters. Consistency matters. Accountability matters. And mutual choice matters. No hidden feeling can replace these things. The dying woman understood that too. There was another part of the conversation your soulmate could not stop remembering. Near the end of the visit, after a long silence, she said your name directly. And then she whispered something they were not prepared to hear. That person did not need you to be fearless. They needed you to stop making them pay for your fear. Your soulmate lowered their head. That was the sentence. The sentence that followed them into the parking lot. Into the car. into the night. Because suddenly, their story about the past began changing. They had always thought of themselves as someone who was protecting their heart. Now they began seeing the cost of that protection. Maybe every time they disappeared, you learned to trust them less. Every time they withheld what they felt, you were forced to guess. Every time they pulled close and then suddenly became distant, your nervous system learned not to relax fully around their affection. What felt to them like self-protection may have felt to you like emotional instability. They had never thought about that. Not deeply. Until now. And while they were facing this truth, something else had been changing inside you. You were no longer the same person who once believed love meant endless patience. You had learned that understanding someone's wounds does not require accepting the wounds they inflict on you. You learned that empathy and boundaries can exist together. You learned that chemistry without clarity can become confusion. Attention is not commitment. Intensity is not consistency. Apology is not repair. And missing someone does not automatically mean returning to them is wise. These lessons did not make you cold. They made you clearer. There were days you still missed them. That was human. Healing does not always remove affection immediately. Sometimes healing simply means the affection stops controlling your decisions. And this is where the paths of two people begin approaching the same question from opposite directions. They are asking, am I brave enough to tell the truth? You are asking, if truth arrives, is it supported by action? Both questions matter. There was a funeral not long after that final visit. Your soulmate stood among people speaking softly, holding flowers, sharing memories. Someone described the woman as the person who always said what everyone else was afraid to say. Your soulmate almost laughed through their grief. That sounded exactly right. On the way home, they drove past a place that reminded them of you. This time, instead of quickly changing the radio or distracting themselves, they let the memory come. They remembered your voice. Your patience. Your frustration. The good. The painful. The parts of the story in which you had made mistakes too. Because you were never perfect. You had fears of your own. Moments when your hurt made you defensive. Times you may have expected them to understand what you had not explained clearly. Love stories are rarely one innocent person and one villain. But there was one difference they could no longer ignore. You had tried to bring things into the open. They had often tried to survive by keeping things hidden. That evening, they went home and sat in the dark for a while. Then they opened your conversation again. The last messages were still there. Ordinary words with extraordinary history behind them. Their finger rested near the keyboard. Nothing happened. Not yet. And you need to understand why. One final barrier remained. It was not distance. It was not another person. It was not timing. It was shame. They could imagine telling you they missed you. That felt vulnerable, but possible. What frightened them more was admitting the specific ways they had failed you. I was scared sounded easier than saying, I made you question your worth because I would not communicate. I needed space sounded easier than saying, I wanted you close while refusing to offer you security. I didn't know what I wanted sounded easier than saying, I expected you to tolerate confusion while I figured myself out. Truth has layers. And they were beginning to understand that reconciliation, if it were ever even possible, could not be built on partial truth. So they began practicing honesty somewhere safe. First with themselves. They wrote things down. Not a love letter. Not yet. A list. What did I do? What was I afraid of? What did it cost them? What would need to change? What am I willing to do differently even if they never take me back? That final question mattered most. Because genuine growth cannot depend entirely on receiving the reward you want. If they only change so you will return, then their transformation remains a transaction. But if they become more honest because honesty is who they are choosing to become, then something real has begun. My beloved child, do not build your peace around the possibility that this person reaches out. Your life is happening now. Your heart belongs first in the care of God, wisdom, truth, and the boundaries you have earned through experience. You do not need another person's realization to prove that you mattered. You mattered while they were confused. You mattered while they were silent. You mattered even during the nights you believed you had been forgotten. Another person's late understanding cannot create your value. It can only reveal what they failed to recognize earlier. And if a conversation comes, do not rush to make it mean more than it does. Listen. Observe. Give words time to become behavior. See whether accountability remains when the emotion of reunion fades. See whether consistency follows apology. See whether courage remains after vulnerability becomes inconvenient. You are allowed to move slowly. You are allowed to ask difficult questions. You are allowed to forgive without immediately rebuilding access. You are allowed to love someone and still require evidence that the relationship can become healthier than it was before. Heaven does not ask you to confuse hope with self-abandonment. There is grace in love. There is also wisdom. Now, something in your soulmate has shifted. Not because someone promised them you would return. Not because fate removed the consequences of their choices. But because a woman with very little time remaining refused to let them hide from themselves. Her final gift was not a prediction. It was a mirror. And what they saw in that mirror changed the question inside them. They are no longer only wondering whether you still care. They are beginning to wonder whether they are finally capable of caring for you in the way they should have before. That question has followed them into quiet mornings. Into sleepless nights. Into those strange moments when your name arrives in their mind without invitation. They have started noticing the difference between missing your presence and being prepared for your heart. Those are not the same thing. And somewhere inside them, a decision is forming. Still incomplete. Still frightening. But more honest than before. The message remains unsent. For now. Not because nothing is felt. Not necessarily because everything is destined. But because the next step demands something they have avoided for a long time. They will have to choose between protecting the image they have of themselves. Or telling you the truth about who they were, what they feared, what they regret, and what they intend to do differently. And if they choose truth, there is one sentence they know they cannot avoid. It is not, "I miss you." It is not, "I never stopped caring." It is not even, "Can we try again?" The sentence waiting beneath all of those is harder. "I understand what my silence did to you." That is the doorway. Whether it opens into reconciliation, forgiveness from a distance, or simply the closure both of you once needed, no one should force the outcome before the truth arrives. So keep living. Keep healing. Keep becoming the person who no longer mistakes uncertainty for devotion. Do not chase what has not learned how to meet you. Do not shrink your standards because someone's regret touches your heart. And do not close yourself to grace simply because the past taught you caution. You can have both. A soft heart. And clear eyes. Something has begun changing beneath the surface, my beloved child. But the next chapter will not be decided by hidden feelings. It will be decided by courage. By truth. By what happens when the words that have been written and deleted so many times finally remain on the screen. And somewhere tonight, your soulmate is still staring at that unfinished message, remembering the final whisper of a woman who understood before they did that love cannot keep asking someone else to carry the cost of fear. Their fingers hover above the words. Your name is there. The apology has begun. But there is one final truth they still have not found the courage to type. And until they do, the story remains unfinished.